Lily was a child like no other. While most kids giggled and ran without a care in the world, Lily had a knack for noticing things that others ignored. She wasn't one to overlook even the tiniest details: the flick of a stray cat's tail, the cracks weaving patterns on the sidewalk, or the tired, worn look in a stranger's eyes. At just 6 years old, she possessed a heart far bigger than her small frame could contain. Her mother, Sarah, often said, "Lily doesn't just see the world, she feels it." And it was true. Lily had a way of sensing when someone or something needed kindness. She didn't just pass by. She stopped, looked closer, and cared. Life wasn't always easy for Lily and her mother. They lived in a modest little apartment on the outskirts of a bustling town. The walls were thin, the furniture secondhand, and the streets outside weren't lined with fancy shops or glowing lights. But inside their small home, there was warmth and love. Sarah, Lily's mother, worked tirelessly to make ends meet. Mornings were spent at the local deli, where she prepared sandwiches and poured coffee for customers, her hands moving swiftly, but never without a smile. Evenings were dedicated to cleaning offices, scrubbing floors, and wiping windows until they gleamed. "Money's tight," Sarah would often say, "but we have enough. And when you have enough, you can always share." It was a lesson Sarah had drilled into Lily's heart, a lesson that generosity didn't depend on wealth. One crisp autumn afternoon, Lily learned just how powerful that lesson was. But what she didn't know was that her simple act of kindness would ripple far beyond her imagination. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, a man who seemed to have everything was quietly falling apart. Johnny Depp, a name known around the world, wasn't just an actor. He was a legend. Known for his transformative roles, magnetic charisma, and the ability to disappear into any character, Johnny was one of Hollywood's most cherished icons. But fame came at a price. Behind the glitz and glamour, his life was unraveling. For years, Johnny had fought endless legal battles, endured harsh public scrutiny, and wrestled with an unbearable loneliness that no amount of money or fame could cure. The tabloids loved his pain. They plastered his name and face across every cover, twisting his struggles into juicy headlines. Paparazzi swarmed him like vultures, their cameras capturing his heartbreak as though it were entertainment. Even in his sprawling mansions, surrounded by wealth and luxury, Johnny felt like a prisoner. Fame, he had learned, often stripped away the one thing he longed for most: genuine connection. "You need to disappear for a while," a close friend had told him one night. Johnny hesitated. He wasn't the kind to run away, and the thought of leaving felt like admitting defeat. But after another exhausting week of flashing cameras and strangers treating him like a spectacle, he gave in. "I'll try it," he muttered, almost as if convincing himself. The next day, Johnny packed a small bag with the essentials. No entourage, no assistants, just him. He left strict instructions for his team to stay away and not contact him unless it was an emergency. Then, he got into his car and started driving, the hum of the engine drowning out his swirling thoughts. He drove for hours, through busy highways and quiet country roads, until he stumbled upon a quaint little town tucked away from the world. The town was unlike anything Johnny had seen in years. There were no red carpets or flashing lights. The streets were cobblestone, lined with small shops that displayed handmade goods in their windows. The air smelled of fresh bread and fallen leaves, and the park in the center of town was surrounded by golden trees that swayed gently in the autumn breeze. Johnny stopped the car and sat in silence for a moment. He had no plan, no idea of what he was even looking for. But something about the stillness of the town called to him. He found a small, unassuming cabin on the outskirts, far enough to give him the isolation he craved. The cabin wasn't luxurious, just a cozy wooden structure with a simple bed, a tiny kitchen, and a fireplace. "This'll do," Johnny thought to himself. Days passed slowly in the little town. For the first time in years, Johnny didn't have a schedule to follow, a role to play, or cameras to dodge. He blended in, hiding beneath hats and sunglasses, keeping his head low and speaking to no one. Every morning, he would wake up, make a cup of coffee, and take a walk to the park. There, he sat on the same weathered bench, watching the world move around him without really engaging with it. The quiet was deafening. At first, Johnny welcomed the stillness, but as the days turned into weeks, the silence began to weigh on him. The nights were the hardest. As he lay in the small cabin bed, his mind replayed every mistake, every regret, every moment of pain. "Why does it still hurt so much?" he whispered into the empty room one night. Despite the beauty of the town, Johnny felt trapped inside his own thoughts. The golden trees and crisp air couldn't chase away the storm in his heart. And that's how he found himself one cold afternoon, sitting on a splintered bench in the park. His thermos of coffee was empty. His stomach growled from hunger, but he didn't care. His shoulders slumped, his hat pulled low over his face. Johnny looked like a man who had lost all hope. He didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. The days crept by in the little town, the kind of place where every face was familiar, every passerby exchanged a wave or a smile. But not Johnny. He kept his distance, blending into the background like a shadow. His hat sat low over his face, his sunglasses shielded his weary eyes, and he avoided conversations like they were traps waiting to spring. Every day felt the same. He'd wake up to the chirping of birds he didn't notice, brew a cup of coffee he didn't enjoy, and take his slow, aimless walk to the park. There, he'd settle on the same weathered bench, his shoulders slumped as he watched life unfold around him. People walked dogs, parents pushed strollers, and kids laughed as they chased each other through the leaves. But Johnny didn't join them. He didn't even look them in the eye. It wasn't just the world he was avoiding. It was himself. He hoped the quiet of the town would bring him peace, but instead, it felt like a magnifying glass, forcing him to face the storm inside. The nights were the hardest. The silence of the cabin turned into a cage, trapping him alone with his thoughts. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, as every mistake and regret replayed in his mind like a never-ending film. It was relentless. Peace wasn't coming. The heavy ache in his chest only grew worse. Then came that fateful afternoon. Johnny sat hunched on the bench, the cold autumn wind tugging at the golden leaves above him. His thermos, long since empty, rested beside him as he stared blankly at the ground. He hadn't eaten all day. He hadn't even thought about food. His mind was too full of the past, too weighed down by the pain he couldn't seem to let go of. To anyone walking by, he might have looked like just another man enjoying a quiet moment in the park. But Lily saw something different. Her little feet crunched through the fallen leaves as she approached him, clutching the sandwich her mother had packed for her lunch. She stopped a few steps away, tilting her head as she studied him. He didn't notice her at first, too lost in his despair. But when she spoke, her voice as soft as the breeze, it startled him. "Are you hungry, mister?" she asked, holding out her sandwich with both hands. Johnny looked up, surprised. His sunglasses couldn't hide the sadness in his eyes, and Lily saw it immediately. Her small, innocent face was full of concern, not judgment. For a moment, Johnny couldn't find the words. A lump formed in his throat as he stared at the little girl, her kindness cutting through the fog in his mind. Finally, he managed to croak, "Why are you giving me your lunch?" Lily shrugged, a shy smile spreading across her face. "You look like you need it more than me." And in that simple gesture, Johnny felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. What followed next would change both their lives forever.